Hi, y'all. This week we will be talking about international crime, and this lecture is on international crime justice. It's a little bit different than what we've been talking about. There's a little bit more on the policy side of things as opposed to the prison side of things, but it is definitely worth talking about, especially when you look at society on the extreme macro level. So today's agenda, we will be talking about what exactly the ICC is and its functions. We'll talk about some of the problems with the ICC, some of the results of the ICC, and then we will go over our discussion prompt. So let's talk about some basic definitions, because especially in the United States, these definitions can get a little bit confusing only because of the way we talk about things in our country. So a nation is a group of people who hold a common cultural identity. A nation. And then different from that is a state, which is the territory of a given government. This can get confusing on two levels. First of all, we live in a world in our modern era where most nations control their state. So the Chinese nationality controls the territory of the Chinese people, so that lines up pretty well. The Indian people from the nation of India control those people. The German nation controls the German state. Now, there are some nations that do not control their state. The Dakota Sioux do not have their own territory or state, and we're seeing that in the news a little bit now, and we'll talk about that in our prompt. The Laplanders in Scandinavia they are a nation without a state. Prior to the foundation of the State of Israel, the Jewish people did not have a state. They were a nation of people without a state. And the example I give, many Native American tribes do not control their territory, as most reservations are not recognized as states. And that brings up another point. When I say state, I am not talking about one of the 50 regions in our country, the United States. I am talking about governments, national governments. So our state in this context is the United States. Our state is not New Mexico for you or Ohio for me. Our state is that kind of state. And yeah, it's really confusing because when people use words to mean different things, it gets confusing. Send me an email if you need further clarification. But let's talk specifically what the ICC is in regards to this week's reading. The ICC is the International Criminal Court. It was founded in 1998 under what's called the Rome Statute. It is based in the Netherlands. Sometimes the ICC is referred to as The Hague. The Hague is actually the city within the Netherlands that the ICC rests in, but you will often hear ICC simply referred to as The Hague. It's kind of similar to referring to, politics in the United States as, Washington, referring to Washington, D.C., the city, same kind of thing. The ICC was created to pursue perpetrators of genocide and other war crimes. There are currently 124 states that have signed the Rome Statute. They are expected to abide by the rulings of the court as signatories. It is important to note that the United States has been a signatory in the past, but we are not currently a signatory. We dropped out of that a few years ago, so we are not part of the ICC at the moment. We still contribute, we still have a bit of a say, but when it comes down to voting matters, we are not in it. And the reason as to why can be debated in far longer than we have time for at this moment. The functions of the ICC are to hold nations and leaders of nations accountable for their actions. So in the past, it has been very possible for leaders of nations or nations themselves to do some really terrible things. The foundation of war tribunals came in the modern era a lot out of what happened in Nazi Germany. We decided as a world that we need to hold countries accountable to keep them from doing hideous things. It's very much a thing of the modern era. And in the modern era, once those nations are held accountable, the ICC provides assistance and support and reparations for victims of the above nations, of the 124 signatories. That leads to a problem in those countries that are not signatories. So if a nation has not signed that treaty, they effectively have not agreed to fall under the jurisdiction of the ICC. Therefore, hypothetically, the leaders of those countries could do whatever they wanted. It's very much a matter of accountability to each other. It's good foreign politics. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the problems of the ICC, though. And some of these problems, particularly the state sovereignty issue, is part of the reason why the United States isn't a signatory. States like to control themselves. States like to say, well, these are the laws in our country, and it doesn't matter what the laws are in Italy. We are going to have these laws in our country. And there are philosophical arguments that occur when outsiders, people from outside that state, try to say what happens in our state. And we even see this within our own country when laws are passed in Washington, D.C. People in Maine, people in California start to have arguments as to, well, what does that mean for us? Also, another issue is states as perpetrators. So the way we think of nations and states is that states are typically the ones to enforce the laws. They're the ones to establish the laws. They are the ones to make sure everyone follows the laws. So we start to have philosophical conversations when states become the subject of laws as opposed to the bestowers of laws. So what exactly does it mean to hold a government accountable for something? We know how to put people in prison, but how exactly do you put Canada in prison, for example? Another major issue with the ICC is that there is not so much power to enforce the rulings. Nations have to cooperate in order to punish criminals. So if you want to punish the President of the United States, then the United States itself has to agree to punish said president. And there need to be functions within that. It would be very, very difficult for England or Great Britain or Russia or Canada to arrest the President of the United States, for example. I mean, it probably could be done, but it would take some doing. And then we have the greater question, what does it mean when nations are criminals? This came up and comes up in every discussion of the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. Who was guilty? Was every single person that lived in Germany guilty? Were just those people involved in some way with the genocide? Were they guilty? Even then, We have millions of people. How do you punish millions of people? Were only the people at the top of those leadership positions held as guilty? That is what was ruled in the trials in Nuremberg after the end of World War II. But just because you execute those people at the top doesn't mean that justice has been done the whole way. There's a lot of philosophical arguments having to do with these. And then, how do you punish an entire state? Typically, what we've done in the past as a world is we've imposed sanctions and embargoes. That's one thing the UN is actually relatively, they know how to do it. Other times, war occurs because of these types of issues. If the president of India was wanted by the president of Pakistan, in all likelihood that would result in a war to capture that person. It would not probably go very smoothly. So let's talk about our discussion prompt. So this week we are doing a bit of current events. I want you to review the situation surrounding the Dakota Access pipeline. And you will see the discussion board links there. I don't just want you to Google the situation. I want you to examine the links that I provided because I find them as trustworthy, if not entirely unbiased. At least they're trustworthy. So look on the discussion boards for those. So review, and then in your paper, tell me about the situation in a few words. And then in part 2, which is the more important part, if the ICC determined that the U.S. government was guilty of not honoring the treaty signed with the Sioux Nation in 1851, how do you think our government would respond? How do you think the American public would respond to such accusations? And then just muse about, think about, write about, would the ICC even be able to conduct a trial, or would they have to take alternative actions to helping the Sioux people or bringing justice to the situation? What would justice to the situation look like? Just work over that. And with that, I will let you get to work. Thank you.